Actually, I'm going to hand the mic over to Dr. John Fisk, the director of the Wallace Center at Minnerock International, to begin our discussion on food hubs today. John?
Yep. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jeff. And Marty, thanks for that overview of the NGFN. It's great to be with you and to be talking about something as timely and as important as food hubs. As many of you know, there's a growing interest in a more regionalized food system and in increasing the amount and the diversity of food that is sourced locally. People come at this with a lot of different motivations. Some are looking for better access to fresh, healthy food for all communities. Some are looking to strengthen the opportunities for small and mid-sized farmers. Some are interested in supporting a more environmentally sound agriculture through a more regionalization of the food system. And others are interested in stronger regional food economies that maintain existing or provide new jobs, ones that are locally and independent and interdependent with place. However, in order to go from direct marketing by farmers to consumers, which we see a lot of these days and is really popular, to a more scaled up regional food system that provides a larger amount of product on a more consistent basis to schools and other institutions, to retail stores, and to restaurant chains, we need to find solutions to the bottlenecks that stem from the need to aggregate, store, cool, and distribute farm products so they can successfully reach these markets in a timely way. Food hub is a broad term that describes such aggregation and distribution facilities. Many of these also provide or play other roles and additional services in the value chain, which we're going to see today in the webinar. So there's a need for appropriate scale infrastructure for more regional food systems that is accessible for small and mid-sized farmers. In addition, there's a need to work with existing infrastructure, working what's out there that would benefit. Many of these would benefit from regional market commerce and could effectively fill the gap in the value chain that we're looking for. Existing infrastructure would include things like producer co-ops, existing distribution companies, public markets that do wholesale, and in some cases, retailers that have their own warehouses, and so on. Food hubs hold a lot of promise, but it's also clear that we're pretty early on in their development. And we're not really clear at this point what's going to work and what's not going to work. Clear models and strategies such as this are just starting to only now emerge. Because of this, the Wallace Center, in partnership with the USDA Ag Marketing Service, the Project for Public Spaces, and the National Association of Public Market Managers, are partnering to establish the National Food Hub Collaboration to advance and develop food hubs. In our first phase of work, we've sought to identify existing food hubs across the country. We're also looking to better understand the nature of these operations, their successes, their challenges, what opportunities they see. We did this through an online survey with producer and consumer-driven food hubs, as well as with managers of public markets. In addition, we did phone interviews with a subset of those that took the online survey, and we did focus groups with those that run public markets in an effort to find out some deeper knowledge in what characterizes food hubs these days. Next slide. The online survey was sent to 72 food hubs and 36 public markets. 45 hubs completed the survey and 25 public markets completed the survey. Slide. You can see that the distribution is pretty good across the country on the food hubs itself and then on the public markets as well. So we've got a pretty nice data set from which to draw, and some of what we'll present to you today will draw from this data set. Some of the other will be individual cases within the data set. Last thing I want to tell you about is that today's format is a new format for us. We have an excellent panel, but today we're going to have a panel moderator who's going to ask the panel members questions, and then their responses will be shown on the screen. So you'll hear it and you'll see it. After that, we'll do the Q&A, and we'll be able to respond to your questions, the one that you submit in that bottom right-hand box that says questions. And then we'll wrap up from there. So with that, let me introduce you to today's moderator, Scott Cullen. Scott is the Executive Director of the Grace Communications Foundation, which highlights the interconnections of food, water, and energy, educating consumers, advocates, and policymakers through web-based initiatives, many of which you've heard of, like the Ecocentric blog, the Eat Well Guide, the Matrix, Sustainable Table, Meatless Monday, Healthy Monday, and Kids Cook Monday. So with that, let me turn it over to Scott to take us through today's webinar.
Thanks. It's great to be on this call and to talk to such a great panel with such a timely subject. If we're going to spend an hour talking about food hubs, we need to better understand them. So for that part of the conversation, we're fortunate to have Jim Barnum, who is an agricultural economist for the Marketing Services Division of the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. Jim is also a PhD economist in agricultural economics from the University of Florida, and before joining the USDA, he worked extensively in the Middle East, Africa, and the Caribbean with a number of nonprofits and government agencies on projects targeting small landholders. And so, Jim, as a leader in the food hub movement, we'd love to hear more about what they are and where you see them going.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. So we have kind of a working definition of food hubs that we're using right now, and it's something that we as a group, along with the Wallace Center and our partners, are continually refining as we learn more about food hubs and the role that they play within the food system. So you can see here our working definition, but really beyond this kind of fairly lengthy, convoluted definition, there's some core components. So on the next slide, you'll see we look at food hubs with really having three core components. So the first piece is kind of the aggregation distribution piece. Food hubs is a drop-off point for multiple farmers and a pickup point for distribution and customers that want to buy. And here's the key piece of this: source identified local and regional food. Secondly, and this is probably the most important component of food hubs, is the active coordination. Food hubs have typically a business management team. Well, sometimes it's just one person, but usually there's more than just one person involved that are actively coordinating supply chain logistics. Everything from looking for markets for producers, coordinating with distributors, processors, and finding markets, working with institutional buyers, retail buyers, and other wholesale buyers that are interested and have demand for locally and regionally grown products. And then third core component, typically food hubs have some kind of facility that is housing both. It could be a warehouse for storage of the products, some light processing, packaging would be going on within these facilities. This might be something the food hub itself owns or partners with others in order to provide these services in order to ensure that the products they're selling to these wholesale buyers meets their requirements. Beyond the core components, food hubs do a lot more than just these three things. There's a lot of other possible services that they provide. It could be everything from production training for farmers. It could also be, if they're close to retail customer populations, to be offering EBT, social services, health services, etc. There's a lot of different models out here. On this slide, you can see what you can kind of classify them as different types of models based on who's kind of driving the process. So we have nonprofit-driven models, which we'll hear from one today from Local Food Hub. There's a lot of producer entrepreneur-driven models, and you can see some of the examples we have there. A lot of times these might be a producer co-op. In other cases, it's just like a producer association or group of farmers who've gotten together to be able to market, aggregate, distribute, and market their products. Retail-driven model is becoming kind of a new innovation, particularly with the number of food cooperatives that have began to actually set up their own distribution systems. And then there's the growing number of consumer-driven models like Oklahoma Food Co-op and others, which essentially are these online buying clubs that link a number of farmers with consumers. And then the other model that we're going to be exploring today is this hybrid market model. This isn't some kind of industry term, but it essentially connotes those markets where there's wholesale and retail activities going on. Eastern Market in Detroit, which we'll hear about today, is a good example of that, where you both have wholesalers that are selling both to consumers as well as to restaurants and other institutions. And then you also have a retail segment that operates more like a farmer's market, where consumers can buy directly from farmers. And then finally, within kind of the food hub world, there's a number of these virtual food hubs, which essentially act as these online matchmaking platforms, where we see ones like EcoTrust Food Hub, Locally Grown, Local Dirt, and of course, many of you may know about Market Maker, which is across multiple states. So in a sense, that gives you some of those models out there. Back to you, Scott.
So on the call today, we have an excellent example of a nonprofit-driven food hub, the Local Food Hub in Virginia, and we're going to hear from Kate Collier, who is the executive director. Kate grew up on a small farm and is a graduate of the University of Virginia. After that, her and her husband started a specialty food store, Feast, in Charlottesville, which is supposedly quite amazing. And she's a founding director of the nonprofit organization and is also an appointed member of Virginia's Specialty Food Advisory Committee, as well as on the Virginia Food System Council, and she has great connections with farmers, business folks, and the community, and really understands these issues. So Kate, I thought maybe you could tell us a version of how you got to start and what brought you into this work.
Sure, Scott. Thank you. Well, the local food movement really took hold here in Charlottesville in about 2006, and that's when we noticed that more and more people were starting to ask for local food at their restaurants and grocery stores, and they wanted their children to have access to it at their schools. Then came the tough economic times of 2008, and a big group of businesses and institutions got together to see how they could put some of their food budget towards local purchasing and target their dollars towards rural economic development. Kind of out of these discussions, the local food hub was established, and in 2009, through the donations and grant support from local individuals, foundations, and a county economic development authority, we got started. Currently, we operate two businesses. One is a distribution warehouse, and the second is an educational farm. Our goal is to provide struggling family farmers with the infrastructure and educational services they need to grow and deliver more food to the community that's asking for it. July 7th is our second birthday, and it's really hard to believe how much we've been able to grow in these 2 years.
So we also have a wonderful example of a hybrid market, in this case a public market, the Detroit Eastern Market. And today we have the president, Dan Carmody, and Dan is educated as a city planner and has been integral since 2007 in the development of this market. So Dan, we hear a lot about the work that you're doing. I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. Slide, please. Since 2007, I've had the honor of operating and being the chief executive of the Eastern Market Corporation, which in 2006 took over operations of Eastern Market from the city of Detroit. Eastern Market's history goes back to 1891. It's been a local food hub for 120 years. It's been a place where food has been processed, and Michigan diversity of agriculture has been assembled in the east side of Detroit for processing, wholesaling, and retailing. We really service farms from throughout Michigan, Ontario, and Ohio. The changes at the market is really the change in the city of Detroit, with particularly the breakdown in distribution and retail. We see an increasing function of the market in terms of education and sort of alternative delivery system development. And as many people hear, the whole urban agricultural movement is very hot in Detroit. There's a lot of community gardening going on, a lot of investigation around production. The graphic on the screen kind of shows really the integral parts to what a food system ought to look like. And our role in the emergence of a more robust local food system in southeast Michigan is to kind of retake some of the market share we've lost as food systems have gone national and then global. The market features a weekly Saturday market where 30 to 40,000 people come, a seasonal wholesale market that features 40 to 50 growers Monday through Friday, midnight to 5 a.m., and a cluster of 80 mostly small-scale local food distribution and processing businesses around the market. I would argue that every city in North America that's older than 1930 had one of those, and we're the last one standing because the underlying real estate didn't become more valuable for bars, boutiques, and lofts. So what we've tried to do since 2006 as the emergence of interest in local food is to try to use that sort of historic relic, that old school local food district, to craft what we think can be one of the more comprehensive examples of a modern, healthy metropolitan food hub. So our mission is to take back more market share and lead the way in new niche processing and alternative distribution schemes to get food into places where it doesn't want to go, and to rebuild the market as a retail destination, while we work with partners to increase production both in the city of Detroit and throughout the region, to change our waste disposal methods to create more organic fertilizers, and then to lead the way in education, to go to both consumers and growers. And again, the dark green dots are what we focus on. The lighter green dots are what we work with community partners on. But all of those activities actually can happen within close proximity of the market. We like to point out that the that kind of vertical integration that was learned on the farm in southeast Michigan by Thomas Edison got applied to the manufacture of automobiles with some success here in Detroit.
So there are many existing food aggregators and distributors, and at first passes is what a food hub is. However, one of the ways that food hubs are different from most existing food middlemen is that hubs tend to have an explicit goal of supporting small and mid-sized farmers and working more directly with them. So Dan, I wonder if you, in your introduction, you talked about farmers, but do you work with your how do you characterize your farmers, and how would you characterize your relationship with them?
Yes, slide please. Our farmers range the gamut from micro neighborhood farmers to macro 1,600-acre fully diversified operations in southeast Michigan. So we work in the retail sense of the world, just trying to help them become better merchandisers. Next, please. And again, this shows sort of the scale of operations. At the center of this food shed, we kind of call for shorthand the MOVE food shed, you have producers of all scale that come from within the city of Detroit, but also from Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario of all sorts of different sizes. And they do come to Eastern Market. Next slide, please. And again, crossover on both wholesale and retail markets. The services and the relationships we build with those farmers are some of them focused directly on direct consumer sales. Next slide, please. But again, the big volume happens to move at night, and the services we try to provide and the relationships we try to build with those growers are around identifying new growth opportunities. Some of our seasoned growers are very sophisticated. Some of our new growers are not sophisticated at all. So we really have to tailor the services we provide our different growers with where they're coming from in the life cycle of their businesses, and trying to connect them to the smaller scale distribution houses. There's already a lot of small scale aggregators. I think taking your time to understand sort of this organic world of food distribution that is going on in most cases, and I think a good hub tries to amplify and kind of fill in the missing gaps. But first order business is really to understand how food currently from regional producers is getting into different distribution channels. That's next slide, please. And again, I just want to point out that as we see a hub, it's really a place where the producer, there's this sort of organic connections, and there's lots of arrows going back and forth on the flow chart between producers and consumers, between producers and distributors, between producers and processors, between processors and distributors, between distributors and distributors. And it's really understanding the myriad of relationships that go into a robust food system. It's really a starting place to understand where the gaps are, where the opportunities are. And we think that first order business is really understanding what the current pieces you have in your regional food economy before you jump in and start fixing things. And I think as I think it was John pointed out, that this is early on in the work of food hub development, and we've spent a lot of the last 3 years just trying to really understand the lay of the land and conducting some sort of early experiments across niche processing, cultivation, around specialty and alternative distribution schemes, and increasing around different forms of direct retailing here at the market to be able to better advise our growers on how to expand their markets.
So Kate, could you tell us what sort of farms benefit from working with the local food hub in Virginia?
Sure. The local food hub targets its food purchasing and services towards small to medium-sized, family-owned and operated farms whose goal is to increase their food production in a sustainable way. Right now we work with more than 50 growers located within about a 2-hour drive of our warehouse. This number is growing weekly as the good word spreads in our farming community that we're a large and consistent purchaser and that we pay well and we pay on time. All across the country, farms of this scale are struggling with the financial resources it takes to hire the people they need to coordinate production, sales, delivery, and accounting of their food. Working with the local food hub allows farmers to focus their resources towards the food production part of things. We handle the sales, delivery, marketing, and accounting end. So we save farmers time and money by providing those services. Our farmers give us feedback at our 2010 end of season survey that shows that by working with us, they were able to increase their food production by an average of 30% last year. So that's what we're focusing on.
So Jim, in your survey, did you find that the local food hub and the story in Virginia is typical of the food hubs out there?
Yeah, Scott, actually I think it is. I mean, the slide that's up right now is from the online survey that John mentioned earlier that we did with both food hubs as well as a number of public markets. So when we're looking at food hubs, or those we identified as food hubs, you can see that, the average range and median of the food suppliers there. So the median for most is, you have these food hubs that are working with around 40 or so farmers. There's often a very strong sentiment or mission within food hubs to support local producers and ensure that they get good prices or fair prices. On the next slide, you can see looking at public markets, and this is a bit of a different beast in the sense that you're looking at the tenants within the market itself. Again, they are producers, so we have it here. You can see it's excluding crafts. We're looking specifically at producer tenants, and of course, at a traditional wholesale market, there's not a lot of tenants. They're very large wholesalers. When you go to the other spectrum, when you look at the retail, so this would be year-round retail indoor markets and year-round retail outdoor markets. And then you see also in the middle of the wholesale retail, which would be more like Dan's Eastern Market. There's a fairly large range, but again, you see a lot of differences within each of the markets, and also shows how these different markets are supporting suppliers.
And Jim, what about the other side of the equation, the buyers? What did your survey find for them?
So on this first slide, you see we're looking again at the online food hub survey, and the top markets for food hubs, and they're classified here as primary and secondary. Secondary is one in which less of their sales and less of their energy is being put toward now, or is as an emerging market. So you can see at the top is restaurants is one of the key markets for food hubs, followed by grocery stores. Colleges and universities is actually more of an emerging market. Food co-ops has been a strong supporter of local food and is often a good market for the food hubs. Now, if you shift over to the public markets, we have this classified in three ways: with the wholesale retail hybrid model, as well as the retail, which combines the indoor and the outdoor. You see similar trends in terms of restaurants and grocery stores being very strong markets for public markets in terms of where their buyers are coming from to source these products. Food service providers becomes a bit more important for the wholesale and retail. And then you can also see that for retail, this is actually very interesting. So you have a number of, say, year-round farmers markets that are now getting more involved in actually doing wholesale sales. And so that's the green columns there, and you can see some interesting trends there in terms of where they're also selling to.
So Dan, can you comment on who your buyers are and how you would continue to expand your portfolio of buyers?
Yeah, I think that Jim had, those charts show a pretty good cross-section that represents us, the buyers at Eastern Market. One of the things in the rush to, Detroit is often characterized as America's ultimate food desert because there's no national grocers in the city of Detroit. But what a lot of people forget is that the Detroit metro area is still 4.5 million people. And I would argue, I've been around the country a bit, not everywhere, but the suburbs of Detroit probably have the deepest bench in terms of high-end, locally owned grocers in the country. There's probably 20 different locally owned multi-unit chains, and those are the backbone of the buyers at our market. They come to Eastern Market to buy the best local produce they can because it's fresher and they can beat the large national chains on produce quality at their stores. That's the primary buyer. Other buyers include smaller distribution houses. We probably have 40 of them that are set up around the market district. When I first took this job, I didn't understand the important function that some of those, quite frankly, bottom-fishing, low-quality distribution houses serve, is that at 5 o'clock in the morning, they're the last guys to walk through the market, and they're underbidding the farmers. But the farmer still has the choice about whether to take the truck back empty and try to sell it tomorrow, or to turn it into cash. And that's a kind of important ecological function that some of those, as I say, smaller scale, lower quality distributors serve. We are working on a number of fronts to try to grow the types of buyers at the market. There's initiatives with some of the larger institutions, the medical campuses and universities trying to source more food locally. We are in the process of interviewing the first ever wholesale market coordinator that we will hire, and that's something we hope to get done in the next few weeks. We have developed with community groups 5 different intervention strategies to get fresh food from Eastern Market into underserved neighborhood locations. Talk a little bit about that under the services category coming up. One of our most exciting adventures is with Detroit Public Schools. They have a $16 million annual food direct purchase budget, and they have an internal goal in their food services office to convert 30% of their purchases from processed foods to locally grown and or slightly processed foods. And we are jointly creating a position with some funding from the foundation and from Detroit Public Schools to have someone on our staff that will try to work with them directly to overcome some of the supply chain crinks. And we discovered one accidentally last year in executing a fresh fruit and vegetable pilot grant from USDA. A local vendor had no problem sourcing Michigan-grown crops to get into school lunch and breakfast programs, but anything that had to be cut, washed, and packed was being shipped to Indianapolis, Indiana, and shipped back to Detroit. Happy to say that after a couple of months, we finally got a processor here to take on the order. It was a small order with only 9 schools, but nonetheless, kind of highlighted some of the gaps in the supply chain that we need to correct if we're going to grow some of these wholesale institutional markets. That's what I got.
And Kate, how does the local food hub increase the public's access to locally grown food? Maybe we're having a problem with Kate, so I'll move on. Jim, in your interviews, what stood out as one of the major challenges of food hubs?
I'm back if you want me to answer this.
Oh, please do.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, Food Hub is designed to help farmers access large markets that they have been unable to access alone. So we're exclusively an aggregator and wholesaler to businesses. Our farmers here have been doing great at farmers markets and with CSAs and direct-to-consumer sales. So what we're designed to do is really help them get the larger, more consistent customers of the wholesale businesses. Currently, we have a diversified customer base of about 100 clients. These do include the University of Virginia Dining Service, our UVA Health System, a group of senior centers in our area, about 45 public and private schools in our area, distributors including Cisco, U.S. Food Service, and some local distributors, our independently owned grocery stores, restaurants, caterers, and processors. So to these buyers, Local Food Hub offers one number to call for source-verified, locally grown food. We operate an insured and licensed warehouse that aggregates the produce together to meet their high volume and consistency needs. We also employ an informed, professional, and very personable sales team that works with the buyers to project their needs and to procure the produce for them in a timely manner. And we offer point-of-sale and marketing materials that enable buyers to effectively communicate to their customers that they've made a commitment to local food and sustainability. And finally, we deliver all produce in consistent pack sizes via a refrigerated vehicle with a proper invoice. Essentially, we're set up to make buying local as easy as calling our number, and our sales growth this year is up over 300% from last year, so it's working well.
So Jim, maybe now you could get into what stood out as the challenges in your interviews.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's point worth making first is just kind of differentiating between a supply chain and value chain, because it helps us understand some of the challenges that food hubs face as well as some of the opportunities. So when we talk, and I should say this, that really food hubs are an essential driving force for value chains. And I don't want to be layering concept on concept, but it's important to kind of understand the difference between these two things. So a supply chain is really, we're talking about, it's more of a transaction-based versus a value chain, being far more about relationship-based. The time horizon, it's usually a quick one-off with a lot of supply chains versus a time horizon that's quite longer-term relationship foundation. Again, one of the main characteristics of supply chain is that we're dealing almost exclusively with commodities. And in value chains, we're really talking about highly differentiated products. So when you have a supply chain, really your suppliers in many ways are interchangeable. If this supplier isn't getting you what you need, you'll go to another supplier who can offer a similar type of commodity. When you work with value chains, you're working on a relationship, you're working closely with the suppliers, with these producers that are offering unique special products, source identified, that they can command ultimately a premium in the marketplace. Furthermore, when you talk about value chains, you're talking about communication transparency throughout the chain as opposed to just a one-off communication with each of the actors, one step below, one step above you in the supply chain. And there's essentially this attitude that we're doing this together as opposed to each person for themselves, this essence or this idea of more cooperation versus competition, this idea of vertical coordination versus vertical integration. So when we talk about value chains, it's almost really synonymous with what food hubs are trying to accomplish. Now, given that, there's distinct challenges that you face within a value chain or you face as a food hub. And that has to do with the fact that whereas you can't necessarily, once you create relationships with these various folks up and down the supply chain within this value chain, it's not easy just to replace someone if things don't go so well. So for food hubs, it's a lot about building that relationship with producers, helping producers get to the level that they need to be in order to be able to sell confidently at the wholesale level, to work with them on various production as well as marketing practices. And furthermore, it's also working with the buyers to help them understand things about seasonality, about local products, about certain product attributes that may be different from what they're used to. These, in a lot of ways, become unique challenges for food hubs. And there's many other challenges they face. But again, along with all these challenges, there's certainly opportunities by being able to satisfy a growing consumer demand for locally grown products.
So Dan, how about Eastern Market? How do you approach the challenge of balancing supply and demand?
Currently, it's happening in a pretty organic way. Again, our interventions in the market have been fairly recent and fairly minimal, and I think that will change over time here. We've seen a withering away of buyers as more have figured out that they don't need to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. They've built some relationships of trust. And so some of our growers, it's really more of a transshipment point, as much volume as it is a sales point. And so the orders are placed and the growers come here. And we're very concerned about that going forward. So in terms of, it's also the relationship between the wholesale and the retail market. The actual history of Eastern Market's retail market is the place where the wholesale products were dumped at the end of the week. And it's kind of ironic that these days probably the retail market is the far more important market in terms of overall perception of the market. But there's still a lot of the wholesale farmers' product that will end up being sold. And again, we're probably at the retail side of public market, so we have resellers as well as farmers at our market. But a lot of what's being resold in the season is actually locally produced stuff that's moved through a couple of hands. And it's usually, quite frankly, we also maintain a full value spectrum of fairly low cost, low quality stuff, because that's all some of our customers can afford to buy, as well as high cost, high quality stuff. So the supply demand equation is sometimes affected because the lower cost stuff is a little bit older and it's moved through the supply chain a few times as prices have gone down. So that's one of the ways. The other way is really trying to understand the relationship with the supply houses around the market and trying to grow new supply chain relationships with those large institution types. But we think that's going to take some time to play out. And we're very concerned as we get more production scaling up from urban agricultural sources. And that's starting to move from the world of kind of anecdotal to real. We actually have now 3 bona fide vendors that are growing food in the city of Detroit out of a retail base of 250 distinct vendors, although they represent some 600 stalls in the market. So it's still a fairly small percentage. But we believe it's critically important to really start mobilized on looking at that new generation of niche processors. Michigan has great diversity of agricultural products, but we don't have great depth in terms of specialty food processing. We think there's a real opportunity to create some new markets there.
And Kate, how does local food hub balance supply and demand while assuring farmers get a fair and substantial price for their food?
Well, here in the Charlottesville area, the local food hub was started under the assumption that in our market, demand for local food was greatly outweighing the supply. And this has, as we've grown, turned out to be the case with many items, specifically tomatoes, potatoes, green peppers, and all sorts of ripe fruits. Balancing supply with demand is really a constant dance. And because local food hub is the liaison between the small producers and the buyers, we find ourselves in this unique position to kind of take the lead on food production planning. With the help of Anthony Flacaveno from Appalachian Sustainable Development, we started a production planning session. So starting in November of each year, our team reviews our sales, our back order figures, our projected sales growth. It holds meetings with our regular customers to determine their coming year needs. And we put all of this together, this information together into a list, which we call our demand document. We share this with our partner producers at an annual production planning meeting that we hold every December. And this document clearly communicates essentially which items are in demand, how they need to be packed, their quality requirements, as well as we list weekly volume demand numbers by product, and we include high and low price ranges. All of our farmers take this information back with them to home and digest it, and they have 2 weeks to return it to us with their request to supply us with a portion of our demand needs. We get all of those numbers back, we sort through them, and we respond to the farmers within 2 weeks whether we accept or adjust their request for production. The end of year farmers survey report showed that we purchased 100% of our commitment in 2010, and all the farmers responded that they found our pricing more than fair. Essentially, by going through this process, this means that by January 15th of every year, our partner producers know the minimum volume and price that local food hub will purchase in the coming year. Of course, we reserve the right to pay them more and to buy more from them. But this information really helps our farmers when they're making their farm planting schedule and their business plans, as well as it ensures the local food hub a more consistent supply of great locally grown food.
So it seems clear that obviously relationships are such a key part of what you both do, and obviously another part of the conversation is the infrastructure, which means refrigerators, trucks, and distribution centers, and obviously that takes resources, and that's an issue. So Dan, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what your current infrastructure is and what your plans are for the future.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, next, please. Slide. Eastern Market has 5 principal structures. Since the nonprofit took over in 2006, we've invested about $10 million in renovations of 2 of them. We have about a 10-year plan with about another $50 million to invest in a wide range of facilities. The picture on the screen right now is Shed 3, which is used for both the retail market as well as the wholesale market. Next, please. The wholesale market operates since 1891 without benefit of docks or refrigeration. And we know that we have about a 3 to 4 year window to really build a dedicated growers terminal for the wholesale market, particularly if we're going to meet more rigorous food safety concerns with regard to the cold chain. So we're in the process of fundraising for that project. We also are renovating another facility and building a shared use community kitchen, which will be our primary preliminary incubator for a new generation of niche processors. That will lead to the eventual construction of a market hall where we want to feature 20,000 square foot graduates from the incubator, people actually making specialty food products on site for both wholesale and retail markets. We believe that our market could become a much more profound wholesale market and benefit growers if we can also offer our buyers, particularly grocers, access to unique processed products as well as fresh products. Next, please. Another piece that we want to see happen in close proximity to our wholesale distribution hub is really a central commissary for the city of Detroit to actually encourage, rather than its current model of discouraging, on-street vending of prepared foods. So I'm not sure that the food truck craze isn't this year's cupcake craze, but I do know that carts on the streets in Philadelphia and New York and Washington, D.C. have been a great pathway out of poverty and a great interactive way to get new immigrant groups into the economy. And we think that's an important function at Eastern Market where we can really tie the wholesale market sourcing to a variety of alternative retail schemes, really taking local economic advantage of the fact that we don't have chain grocery stores or chain restaurants, in creating more unique entrepreneurial opportunities. Lastly, we're working with one of those virtual hubs, Local Orbit, to kind of create a virtual way for particularly restaurants in the region, wholesale buyers at sort of smaller scale, to really get some of those specialty products both on the fresh side and the prepared side. And we think that there's a real opportunity there to provide yet another form of sales channel for our growers and for our specialty processors.
And Kate, what about you? What infrastructure does Local Food Hub have, and what more do you need?
Well, just to jump off from Dan's comment, I think there's a real big need kind of nationwide for processors. And Local Food Hub currently is operating 2 businesses, so the idea of us doing another one is really not sustainable, but we absolutely want to encourage more processors to come up so that we can preserve. Right now at strawberries, we can have those frozen and available to the schools and for smoothies throughout the year, and it'll also help with the revenue stream in the slow seasons. But essentially the infrastructure that we have currently is we have our distribution warehouse, which is about a 3,000 square foot cooler space. We have 200 square feet of freezer space, a small office, a loading dock, and a 16-foot refrigerated truck. Our educational farm is about 60 acres of certified organic land with a large greenhouse, a packing shed, a box cooler, a barn for classes, housing for farm managers and apprentices, and an office. For us, community buy-in has enabled us to really creatively utilize existing infrastructure. One example is that our warehouse is a refurbished refrigerated facility that was part of an industrial park that had been sitting fallow outside of town for years. When the local landlord heard about what we were doing, he approached us with the opportunity to use it and gifted its use as an in-kind contribution to the organization. And the life that we brought to that space has been really good for his property, and it's now currently fully leased. The use of the farm is also an in-kind contribution. We do need another refrigerated vehicle this year because delivering to 45 schools every week, in addition to our other customers, is really straining our 16-foot refrigerated truck. But really, we're realizing that with this infrastructure comes the need for smart, qualified, and committed staff to really do the thinking and implement the programs that we have to their highest potential. So really, in this pilot phase of development, what we really need is general operations support to supplement paying our staff who are really doing the daily work involved with fine-tuning our sustainable food hub model. We get emails weekly and phone calls as well from groups across the country that have heard about what we're doing, and they want to start a food hub in their region, and what we'd really like is to have the resources to offer them our consulting services.
So obviously personnel and people are a big part of this. So Jim, can you give us an overview of what your survey found and what the Food Hub workforce overview is?
So yeah, on the first slide what we see is the Food Hub from the Food Hub survey, and on average about 12 paid staff per Food Hub. Certainly one thing you do see is that almost a third of the food hubs, and there's many new food hubs that have emerged, almost 60% of the food hubs in our survey were less than 5 years old. So almost a third of the food hubs are actually on working with no full-time staff, maybe some part-time, a lot of volunteer labor is going to a lot of food hubs. Now on the next slide we can look at the public market workforce, actually quite similar in some ways, in which you have quite a few volunteers participating in the public markets, and you see here some of the averages and so forth. Again, with both the food hubs as well as the public market, there's a huge range in terms of employees, both full-time, part-time, as well as seasonal and volunteer.
So Jim, going back to your core components of food hubs, what are the other possible services? Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, actually, I mean, one of the things that we're already learning about today, and I think Kate's going to go into more detail in a second, is that beyond just doing aggregation distribution services, food hubs offer production services, they offer consumer awareness, engagement services, and I'll let Kate go and talk more specifically about her food hub.
So Kate, what are some of those other services?
Well, beyond food distribution and production planning, we offer farm services that really provide our farmers with on-farm technical training that's designed to help them scale up production in a sustainable way with a real focus towards good land stewardship. Our farm services team also acts as the liaison between farmers and government agencies. In doing that, we inform small and mid-sized farms about state and federal programs that can help them with their infrastructure needs and conservation planning for their land. We also collect data every year from our farms that help government agencies understand the needs of this underserved group of farmers. We also operate this educational farm where we host a range of educational opportunities from paid farming and apprentice and internship to food growing workshops for established and backyard farmers. On this farm, 25% of the food that we grow is donated to organizations that feed those in need. We also host events and volunteer opportunities that are designed to increase our community's awareness of and appreciation for local food and educate them as to all the positive environmental and public health benefits that a strong local food system brings. And we have really quickly become that one number to call for all things local food. So our communications team spends a lot of the day fielding questions and connecting people to the right places for answers. So we've really become kind of that hub of information and taken the definition hub to the next level.
And Dan, what kind of services does Eastern Market provide?
Yeah, well, you know, we learned quickly on that we could build the greatest retail destination as a public market, but there's a lot of people in Detroit that don't have access to private transportation, and public transportation isn't very good. So we've spent a lot of time and effort over the last couple of years building alternative delivery methods to get fresh food from our wholesale market into neighborhoods underserved by traditional distribution and retailing. We operate a CSA-style food box program with a local food bank and a local urban agricultural organization called the Fresh Food Share that distributes 200 boxes twice a month to various drop sites, mostly schools and elderly sites in the east side of Detroit. Next, please. We also work with a number of community groups trying to establish a neighborhood network of farmers markets. There are 4 in that neighborhood network that we try to support. We got some USDA funding. I think a shout out to Wendy. I think she's on the webinar today to really try to provide some additional services to those neighborhood markets, more programming, understanding that good markets are as much about place as they are about food, and trying to do more to support the creation of places in the neighborhoods where people can have this engagement around healthy eating. We think that's really important. And most of our neighborhood markets really struggle to get to a sustainable kind of a size, a scalable size that's compelling enough for growers and customers to want to come back. We also operate a farm stand program during the season with college students and high school students where we buy food from our wholesale growers and sell it at hospital and corporate sites. We do about 19 different sites a summer, and that's been very successful in sort of being good advertising for Eastern Market and encouraging really a community, metropolitan area-wide discussion on healthier eating habits. those are all sort of, and then we also do some intervention strategies that we help assist the state of Michigan, help finance for food truck operators that we provide logistics support to. We've got crushed ice and overnight refrigerated storage we make available to them. We also work with some corner store intervention strategies trying to get healthier food into some of the convenience stores in Detroit. Part of the role of the new wholesale market person will be to sort of coordinate buying and aggregate buying from our farmers who already come here for those smaller alternative distributions to try to get a little bit better pricing so that they're more sustainable. So the aggregation can go both ways as far as that goes. Next, please. The other thing we've provided at the market now from a retail standpoint that's really starting to get some traction is to work on the demand side. You're not going to fix a couple of generations of people who have learned how to eat out of convenience stores by just focusing on increasing supply. So we're one of the largest sites of farmers markets in the country for food stamp redemption. We just went over $500,000 since we began the program in late 2007. And I think the subject of a recent webinar that you all hosted, the Fair Food Network, we were their pilot program partners in 2 rounds of food voucher piloting called the Double Up Food Bucks program. This summer, that program will run season long starting June 1st next week. There'll be $200,000 worth of vouchers that food stamp recipients will get up to $20 match every time they use $20 worth of food stamps to buy Michigan-grown fruits and vegetables. That program will be in 40 markets around Michigan this year, and it's really starting to really not only provide an incentive for healthier eating, but actually be a real financial benefit to local growers. I'd also say that on the voucher side, we're, again, working with school districts. That they've funded a program to for parents who take engage themselves in some nutrition education. They're going to get a food voucher to go down the market or go to one of the neighborhood markets to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. And then lastly, we're talking with healthcare providers about doctors writing prescriptions in part for some diet-related diseases that they can come down to the market and get fresh fruits and vegetables in exchange for the voucher. So just some of the services we're providing to try to connect that link between our local growers and improve health outcomes and better education around food.
Thank you, Dan. And you touched on an important element of this, which is the financial sustainability of these operations. So, Jim, I thought you could talk a little bit about the survey and what you found, the size of these operations, as well as the financials.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things, like a lot of what I've already shown so far, is the tremendous range and variation between the food hubs. So this first slide is just really, you can't really read it much, but what you can see is that there's 6 food hubs that are grossing annually over $5 million, and there's a bunch of other food hubs that are not. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at those 29 food hubs that provided some sales figures for us, and this gives you a little better sense. You kind of take some of those outliers out, some of those really monster food hubs, and you end up with these, and then you get a better sense of kind of on average what food hubs are grossing on an annual basis, which is nearly $1 million, less than $1 million, but still quite substantial given the nascent and nature of a lot of the food hubs, those that have really popped up in the last couple of years. And then we shift over to the public markets. What our findings show here with public markets is that we don't really know. And, you know, this was a survey for produce market managers, and produce market managers, some know what the sales are for their tenants, others don't. For the information we did get, obviously, again, a lot of variation, annual gross sales anywhere from $185,000 to $100 million. We're talking serious wholesalers here.
Well, so we do have one public market on the line here. So, Dan, can you tell us about your finances and your business sustainability at the Eastern Market?
Yeah, we're among the old school models. We rent space to our growers, and they conduct business in their fashion. So we don't monitor their sales, although we're beginning to build a better model because after building trust with some of our farmers over the last 3 years, we're beginning to get more than a handful now that are really opening their books to us on a voluntary basis. And so by this time next year, I think we'll have the ability to model kind of what the economic impact of the market is. But in terms of just operating Eastern Market, it takes a staff of about 11 full-time people and another 10 or so part-time and seasonal people. We have a budget of about $1.9 million, and we generate about 60% of the revenue we need from market operations. And currently, are reliant on 40% from state, local, federal grant sources as well as philanthropic grant sources. Our goal is to add some income-producing facilities, including the market halls and the shared use community kitchen, and to, over the next 5 years, reduce that 40% operating gap down to about a 10% operating gap. We believe we have to operate much more entrepreneurially, and the records that we can track are that we have seen our year-to-year rent increases mostly from greater utilization of the market, because we haven't raised our rates very much. The last 2 years, in the worst economy we've had in some time, our year-to-year increases on rent are averaging about 9%.
And so, Kate, you're set up as a nonprofit, and you often hear people joke around that, you know, nonprofits and efficiency just don't go hand in hand. So, how does investing in your food hub and supporting your effort, how would that be characterized as a wise investment, and how would you be sustainable as a business?
Well, food hubs create jobs and they deliver measurable economic benefits by bridging the gap between small growers and the community food system. So food hubs are really a business-based enterprise, whether they're structured as a nonprofit, an LLC, or a co-op. I can share some specific financials about our business with you. We opened about halfway through 2009, and our first year sales were $75,000. Year 2 sales were up to $375,000, and we estimate year 3 sales to exceed $600,000. Essentially, 80% of the sales go to the local farmers for the cost of their food, and 20% goes towards supporting the local food hub's business. Our distribution operation is expected to break even within the next 3 years when sales volume exceeds $1.2 million. And after that, all of our profits will go towards supporting our farm and our educational services. Currently, as a nonprofit, we are set up to raise about $450,000 a year through foundation and government grants, as well as individual donations from members of our community. And we project that this number is going to decrease by 15 to 25% per year, depending on our sales growth. The local food hub was designed to be a sustainable nonprofit because the individuals, foundations, and government agencies who invested in our startup wanted the business to be able to really focus on its triple bottom line social return that a lot of for-profits don't typically deliver. As part of our triple bottom line mission, we're really able to target our services to support the growth of these small to mid-sized entrepreneurial farm businesses so that family farming really becomes a viable profession again. We're also able to target our outreach to farms committed to sustainable growing practices and good land stewardship, and we're all able to offer these additional educational services and financial incentives for conventional farmers to start choosing to go on that path. This essentially ensures that the food that we deliver to the community is healthy for the people as well as for the land. And we focus on regional distribution so that the food stays here and is made conveniently available to everybody in the community where they're shopping and dining. Essentially, as a startup nonprofit, we're really working and collaborating with government agencies and our university and our farmers and our customers to start to be able to measure and quantify our impact on job creation, the environment, and public health. And we're essentially working every day to fine-tune our working local food hub model and hope that it will continue to be used as an example to regional food system supporters of really why starting a nonprofit food hub is a good investment for the communities that can support it.
And Jim, on a macro level and from your national assessment, what do food hubs out there look like in terms of funding, and where is that coming from?
So on this slide, we're showing two things. In blue, we're looking at how food hubs currently are funding their activities, and then in red, when they began their operations. So beginning with the red, you can see the two large ways, or two of the more significant ways actually, is in-kind support and individual donations. What a lot of this is, it was a lot of sweat equity from the original, founders of a lot of the food hubs, the operators who got them up and started. It could be everything from maxing credit cards, borrowing from friends, doing a lot of bootstrapping, but that is only part of it. one of the things that we also highlight here is that there's a number of other ways that that food hubs got started, and that includes that, in our survey, 60% of the food hubs receive some kind of government support, mostly at the local, actually state level, but also at the federal level, and that even currently about a third of the food hubs that we surveyed were also getting some kind of government support. But you can see their foundation funding has been significant, as well as a number of other ways. Now, going over to the public market slide, we see that, not surprising at all, that every public market relies heavily on tenant rents. They're leasing spaces if this is a wholesale market, or there's stall fees if this is a year-round farmers market. But, with many other public entities, they're also relying to a certain extent on grants, other types of local state government funding. If we go on the next slide, we can look at some of the revenue. So we see at the public markets, tenant rents is both, either a flat fee that you pay for a stall, or it could be a % of the sales. And then, of course, there's a lot of other income that could come into the public market, merchandising certain things, parking, gate fees, and holding special events where they charge a certain fee for that. So those are various ways that are significant revenue sources for public markets.
And so from there we see that we've got two models, one public, one private, and one quite new and one over 100 years old. And they're indicative of some of the success stories that we're seeing in food hubs across the country. But Jim, I work for a foundation, and I think about return on investment and whether or not things are really financially viable and sustainable. So maybe you could talk about why you see food hubs having a good chance of reaching financial sustainability.
Well, let me start with what we have learned in some ways, and it'll both address the topic you're asking as well as a little more generally. I mean, we know right now, given a lot of the research we've done even before the survey, is that in many cases the physical infrastructure is actually there. Not entirely. We know there's a lack of some processing, but a lot of the distribution infrastructure is actually there and is really being underutilized. So what it means, in some cases does mean creating new infrastructure, but a lot of it is startup capital to renovate facilities. There's certainly a need for a lot of working capital for the business management systems that are necessary for food hubs to be fully effective. And then there's also the capacity building, enterprise development, particularly on the production side, in order to ensure that the producers, the small and mid-scale producers that food hubs work with, have the capacity to meet wholesale buyer requirements. Now, when we look at food hub needs, and we go to the next slide, what we see is that, well, okay, we lost this slide, but that's okay because this gets more to the viability. One of the things that I want to emphasize before looking at economic viability is that many food hubs, when we talk about their needs and their challenges, funding was actually a smaller part of the greater puzzle. What they're really looking for are sound business models that they could help replicate or that they can scale up, learn from other food hubs, peer-to-peer learning. These types of things are key for what the food hubs feel they need in order to progress and move forward. Now, on the economic viability, what we did is we did some follow-up phone interviews with 20 regional food hubs. And I'll say right up that this was slightly biased because we picked food hubs that had been a little more mature. We wanted to hear from those who've been around for a bit. Not very long. It's been, a couple of years. But still, when we looked at these 20, we were actually surprised to see that many of them actually already are economically viable in the sense that they're covering their operating costs or even turning a profit. Now, what I should say also is that, like with the local food hub and what Dan is doing with Eastern Market, it's more than just about the distribution and aggregation costs. They run a number of other services, whether on the producer side, on the consumer side, which may not be economically viable. But we also have to think about where are the things that are public good that deserve funding from external sources versus things that should be funded externally. And so what we are finding, at least on the internally operational side, food hubs are doing quite well.
Could I add a point there?
Please do.
When I talked about us being covering 40% of total operations cost, Jim's absolutely correct. The services we provide as an economic development organization for the district to help the nearby businesses, the services we provide to help develop neighborhood markets, none of that would be expected to be covered by simply a food hub concept. So a lot of that gap that we do not now cover are services that are sort of above and beyond what a core food hub facility would provide.
And this is John again. Hey, let me jump in there. Scott, you're with a funding organization, being a grant maker, but also involved in a number of grant maker organizations. So I think you've got a perspective across the foundation side. So maybe you could let us know what you see in terms of interest in food hubs among foundations, and what role do you think that they might be playing in this in the future?
Well, I guess I think there's two sides of that equation. I think that there's a real growing interest among among existing foundations in rebuilding the food system, and that's exciting to see. There's also a real growth in new foundations and philanthropic endeavors that are really paying attention to the food system and want to engage in this work. And so, engaging in these philanthropic associations with different foundations, you see a lot of growth and interest in this area that you don't really see in a lot of others. And so I find that, incredibly exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity because I think there's a lot of work to be done. And so I think that, as we move forward and efforts like this where more people come to the table and work across sectors, we're going to see a lot of innovation. And so, I encourage this group to keep doing what it's doing.
Great, thanks. And we would be remiss if we didn't ask Jim the same question, being at USDA, which has a number of excellent programs that have funded either predecessors to food hubs or various incarnations of food hubs. So Jim, what do you see from USDA's perspective and your platform about funding from the government for these kind of things?
Well, it's something we're looking really closely at, and it's a big part of what our group at USDA is trying to do. Yes, we're doing research. We're trying to understand what's working, what's not with food hubs. We're also looking internally at our own USDA grant and loan programs and be able to understand which one of these or how many of these different types of grant and loan programs would be appropriate and suitable to support food hubs. And actually, there's quite a few out there. And one of the things we're doing right now is gathering a lot of this information together so that we can provide to the wider public what USDA grants and loans would be most appropriate for helping to fund food hubs and support the work they're doing. So this is just a couple examples. Rural development, has a number of really excellent grant programs in which they've already started to fund food hubs or have actually for some time. Even in the agency I'm in, the Agricultural Marketing Service, we have the Farmers Market Promotion Program and typically think, oh, this is just for farmers markets, but really it's any kind of direct marketing. And some food hubs that we classify are more direct consumer marketing. So online buying clubs are certainly eligible entities within the Farmers Market Promotion Program, and they're doing all these great aggregation and distribution services on behalf of farmers. And so in a way, even the Farmers Market Promotion Program could be supportive of food hubs. So we are happy to say that I think Jeff will later on be able to direct you to a site that we just put up that has a bunch of food hub resources, and I put together a 4-pager that provides information on what we think are the best bets for USDA grant support for food hubs. A couple other resources. USDA's Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food website is actually really a nice way to learn about different grant loans and other support that USDA offers, and more kind of just, instead of the technocratic, bureaucratic, whatever you want to call it, jargon that we use on these various grant sites that make it difficult to understand whether you're eligible or not or whether you should apply for particular grants or loans. This is a little bit more simplified, regular, that anybody can understand language to understand the various grant programs. So there's also the Deputy Secretary. I definitely highlight the memos that you'll find under that grant loan page are quite useful on the various grants and loans in the various different agencies at USDA. And finally, we were a part of a fantastic conference a few weeks ago called Making Good Food Work, and that site is still up and active, and various project teams put on the site of resources that they found interesting or helpful to them, and includes a lot of really good stuff there. So I would encourage you actually to go to that site, look at the different drop boxes of various project teams, and you'll find really nice information on everything from financial and other types of technical assistance support there.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you too, Scott, for the insights that you both provided on funding. So we've been at this a while, and we've covered a lot of ground. Let me try to bring this ship to dock, so to speak, and talk a little bit about the Food Hub collaboration that we entered the conversation with, and tell you about some of the next steps that we have for this collaboration. When we look forward and we talk about it, advancing and tending to food hubs and helping them expand and get greater understanding of their economic viability and their contribution to communities, we think that a community of practice in which existing food hubs, foundations that are interested, those that are interested in becoming food hubs, organizations like mine can all be part of a learning community. to help move this thing forward, talk about research, talk about access to resources, a peer learning network. And so that's going to be up and running here in the near future. This webinar is really the beginnings of some of that. The research that Jim's talked about that we've aided on is also part of that. So we're laying the groundwork right now for a longer-term community of practice that you'll all be invited to participate in one way or another. Another aspect we think to helping move this forward is the provision of technical assistance. I mean, there's a number of people out there like Dan, like Kate, like many others that answered our survey, as well as a number of consultants that have come out of the food movement for years that have a lot of expertise. We want to build a platform that makes their expertise available to food hubs around the country and those that want to be engaged in food hubs either on a fee-for-service or some kind of a subsidized manner so that we can channel resources to help accelerate this growth. A third piece that we see is to really develop consciously develop some pilots that address some typical markets, if you will. For example, a farm-to-school market. What is the role of a food hub in a farm-to-school scenario where you need a value chain for a consistent supply of product? So to kind of have a standard model, if you will, that will help all those that are trying to do that. It's not going to be, of course, a cookie-cutter template, but it's going to be one successful model that would help inform many others. You know, another might be that would be invested in and developed. We talk around rural markets. Rural markets are difficult. You know, oftentimes the market number is relatively small. The distances are great. So the expenses become higher, and sometimes we're talking about the demand for a lower priced product because there's a lack of wealth in a lot of our rural areas, unfortunately. And so having a food hub model that can help expose and develop some solutions there. And then the third would be, as we talked about, to have a model that would engage with existing infrastructure, take advantage of the infrastructure that's out there already. You know, so to bring those to light. And that brings us to the fourth box that you're seeing on the slide, and it's around outreach and communication, so that when we have those case studies and we have those models developed, that we can get the word out loudly, that we have a loudspeaker and a platform in which to talk, like this webinar, like future webinars, having case studies published, presentations at various workshops and conferences, and to have a group of advisors to the overall food hub collaboration that draws from those that are out there. So that's a little bit about what we see in the future. Currently, as Jim mentioned, let me draw your attention to a current resource that we have through the NGFN, which you can find at ngfn.org/foodhubs. And there you're going to find some information that we currently have, a list of food hubs we're currently aware of, a link to new food hubs so that you can tell us who you are, so you'll find a way to input in your information, existing case studies, analysis, and other information, and we'll be putting more there in the future, and a few other things here. So feel free to go to that. That's up now, and that's one resource for you. From there, I think we're going to head to questions. And on your screen is contact information and other things like that. But I'm going to start the question and answer session. And I've got to tell you, it's a bit daunting. You guys have asked an amazing number and quality of questions. So I'm going to do my best to get through them, and I'm going to ask that our panelists try to keep it short, so to speak, because I want to get through a number of these. And the ones that we don't get through on the call today, we're going to do our best to get them answered in writing and then post them on the website along with the audio recording of this session. So let me, when I looked across the questions as they came in, there were a lot of similar questions in a number of areas. And one of them had to do around food safety. So there was a number of questions that asked the various panel members, what do you do around food safety? What are the demands placed on you? What are the buyers looking for? What is the effect on cost? What are the standards you're keeping? How are you managing this current and even possibly up-and-coming issue for small growers that are trying to aggregate product? So anyone on the panel who wants to address at this point.
I can start from a public market perspective. You know, we're obviously, the buyers are pushing food safety because they're obviously concerned about their liability. So our growers are continually having to adopt stricter, better practices, and what we're trying to do is a hub facility is provide access to training, and so every off-season, November through February, we try to organize, GAP and HACCP training sessions for particularly our smaller growers. Most of our larger growers now have developed the capacity to meet the demands that their buyers are putting on them. I think some of the emerging interest and some of the traceability, the costs are really coming down. I think there's going to be some pretty interesting things going on with regard to traceability that will not be particularly cost prohibitive for smaller growers.
I can answer that too.
Kate, you want to speak to that?
Sure, I can speak to that. Essentially, food safety-wise, what our farm services team really addresses a lot of that at our farm visits. Essentially, any farm that we work with, we go visit first. And we take a look at their water sources, their post-harvest handling techniques, what fertilizers and pesticides they're using, if any, and we provide them with a lot of information about integrated pest management and other ways to essentially increase their food safety and their sustainability. We also are in the process of getting our warehouse GAP certified, which will cover some of the requirements of our buyers. And then our buyers, many of our institutional buyers have required that we carry a $3 million liability insurance policy. And so that's one of the things that we're able to do as an aggregator, whereas the individual farms wouldn't be able to afford that insurance individually. And then to address traceability, we kind of consider that an opportunity to really continue to communicate that this food is coming from good family farms and people that are living on their land and producing their food thoughtfully. So every box that comes out of our warehouse has a label on it which says what farm it's from, and then we're able to track when that product came in with an invoice number or a purchase order number that we put at the top of that label. So we're really able to address some of these food safety concerns without a lot of expense, except for through our farm services outreach.
Mm-hmm. Jim, anything to add, or should we keep moving? I'll take that as a no. Okay,
sorry,
next.
John, I was off. Sorry, I had it on mute. I had it on mute and was trying to talk. The only thing I would add, the only thing I would add to that is, in many conversations with food hubs, there is right now they're working with a core group of producers and with buyers that at this point in time are not necessarily requiring some of the more stringent food safety protocols like being GAP certified, but they're all feeling the pressure starting to come. So the wave is building, and it will crash at some point. At least this is what a lot of the folks are saying. And so what they're trying to do is be proactive, work with their growers, start setting up food safety plans, take it slowly, step by step. It's not like overnight they have to overhaul their whole food system. In fact, many farmers realize it's not as onerous as it has to be. So it's kind of that step-by-step, slowly getting their food safety plans up. So when, indeed, if the day hits where more buyers are requiring something akin to GAP certification, that they're ready for that day.
That's what we're seeing.
Great, thanks. That's a good answer from all of you. Right. Okay. Let's kind of stick at that level around interaction with growers and such. A number of questions we're asking about the relationship to the growers, in particular how do you set prices? And this might be most appropriate for Kate to start with in terms of how do you set prices with your growers? And the other part of the question was, are they typically under contract? So maybe speak from your experience and maybe what you may know of other food hubs as well, Kate, and then we'll go to some others.
Pricing is also a moving target. It's traditional that there's market pricing for produce. And people will go to their tickers and they'll buy the tomatoes that are the cheapest. And I we never really understood how one can make a business when they have no idea what the prices they're going to get for their product. So what we did was really a survey of certified organic, of market price, of what things were selling for in the grocery store, and we went to our farmers and kind of worked on what is a price that we could pay you wholesale that would keep you in business, that would also not be a barrier to our buyers. And we kind of took that first price from our farmers, and we took it to our buyers, and they gave us feedback on it, and we've kind of over the years kind of fine-tuned our pricing to something that's acceptable and fair to both the farmers and the buyers. And then we do have, when tomatoes are coming in like crazy in July, we've really tried to work on production planning so that our farmers aren't all having flushes of tomatoes in July. We're trying to get them high tunnels so that they can get the better price in early season and late season pricing, and kind of actually prune down the production in July when we're getting priced out by stuff coming in from Florida and everywhere. And we do, essentially it's a handshake deal with our farmers. As far as we don't write written contracts, our word is good to them. They come to our warehouse weekly, and they know us from our previous lives in the food business. And they, as I mentioned before, we've bought 100% of what we said we're going to buy, and really our issue is supply. So we have not run into any issues as far as contracts are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Was there another part?
Anybody else? No, I think you covered it. Anybody else have anything to add there?
Just from, at Eastern Market, the price is basically set every night during the wholesale market at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. People are continually negotiating back and forth. We think that's some of the opportunity that exists to try to, for example, when that wave of blueberries or wave of tomatoes comes back, if we had flash freeze or canning or slightly processing facilities to kind of relieve some of the price pressures when the wave hits the market, we think we can serve social purposes, i.e. getting blueberries into the schools in September if we can use their freezers to put flash frozen blueberries in. So we think that's some of the opportunity around hubs to really take some of the high and low out of the market and try to adjust the supply and demand that way.
Great, thanks, Dan. And it kind of segues to another question that has been coming up here, and it has to do with cost of food to some of the institutional markets, such as schools. And I think there's an assumption out there that fresh, local, healthy food is oftentimes more expensive than the more commodity products that especially schools, are typically used to buying, and maybe even other institutions. Now, I guess in some cases that's true, and in some cases it's not. So I think the question has to do with how are the schools dealing with the cost? Is there a cost difference? And I think it's particularly relevant to Dan in Detroit, but I also suspect Jim might have found something out in some of the surveys.
We're blessed here in Detroit with a gal named Betty Wiggins, who's the head of the School of Food Office of Food Services. Again, it's that creativity, trying to think through the menu planning. How can we substitute red beans and rice for some of the meat products? How can we buy a peak of season and use sort of shuttered kitchen facilities as storage sites? They actually have, because 100% free and reduced meal program participation in Detroit Public Schools, they actually generate a fair amount of cash. It's actually a profit center for the schools. And her goal is to try to be able to use up some of the resources that they've been able to achieve from greater efficiencies and put that into the food budget so they don't lose it. So shifting, if you will, some of the operations cost as they've consolidated some schools has given her the opportunity to increase some of the food buys.
Great. Anybody else
this
on
is
that
Jim.
one?
I mean, just to kind of add, yeah, this is Jim. I was going to what I can add to that is, looking at our survey, over 50% of the food hubs are servicing schools. It's about 50. It's about evenly split between it being a primary or secondary market for them. I think probably the great thing to the more important thing to emphasize, at least from kind of a food hub operation perspective, is that it's just one of many market channels that food hubs are serving. It may not be the most profitable one for them. It may be one that actually serves some of their social mission versus their profit motive. But yet it can also be a viable market, certainly depending on where the school districts are located, highly concentrated urban areas where you actually have production not too far away from such urban areas. New York City is a perfect example, and the very successful programs they've had there with Farm to School with apples. A lot of whole fruit types of products have been successfully implemented in the Farm to School programs. So it certainly is feasible, and there's plenty of examples out there. And just to throw a little plug for one of our USDA partners that's also in the Know Your Farm, Know Your Food, there's the Farm to School subcommittee, and very soon they'll be releasing their report from their findings of over a year's worth of investigation of Farm to School programs. So there's a number of viable markets out there. Food hubs use schools as one of those markets, but any food hub should never consider any particular market channel as their only one. So, you know, you look at Kate and you see the diverse number of markets her food hub serves. No food hub should be looking just exclusively at school districts as their only market channel.
I can speak to, we're servicing about 45 schools in our area right now, and as Jim said, apples have been the most successful for us. We have a vibrant orchard industry here in Central Virginia, and we've been able to supply all of the schools with local apples, and they find that our apples cost less than what they had been getting previously. Also, as Jim said, it's fruits. For the fruit and vegetable snack program, a snack for an elementary school student, it can really be 4 strawberries, and that can meet their 32, 35 cent budget, and the kids love it, and they love it much more than the peaches and syrup. And they start to also, we're finding that teachers are able to incorporate it in their educational materials. They're able to talk about what's in season, and we find biology teachers are talking about it, and they're able to incorporate what's coming into the schools for snacks with field trips to farms. And so it's a great opportunity, and I agree with Jim. There are certain products that a food hub can target to get to the schools that make a real difference. And the most important part of that is what Dan spoke to. It's the human capital of the nutrition or purchaser at the schools who really wants to make a change. And if they do that, the impact is really tremendous.
Great, thank you. Moving on, let's think a little bit about how we start these. And there's a number of questions that talk about what do we need to do to start, who can help us, or what kind of an assessment do we need to do, and another part of that is what is our business plan? Do we need a business plan, and that kind of a thing. So maybe Kate, you can speak to that a little bit, having started one of these fairly recently, and then if Jim or Dan, you want to jump in, that would be good too.
Well, I think, absolutely there needs to be a business plan. There needs to be an assessment of whether there are customers for local food and whether there are suppliers that can supply enough product for you to get to the sales numbers that you need to ultimately come to a break-even point. I think that there's a lot of buyers, beware when buyers say they're going to buy millions and millions of dollars, because sometimes it doesn't happen. So it really takes tenacity and building personal relationships. I mean, we've found that you can have a relationship with an institutional buyer who gets another job someplace else and the next buyer doesn't care. So the diversification is really important. And then I guess you find out what your investors, do you have investors that are willing to help it start up? What kind of startup capital do you need? We started with $300,000, and we should have started with a lot more, because we spend a lot of time now kind of trying to catch up to the point of getting to our break-even point. So it's really making an assessment of how much money do I need? Do I have investors that want to invest that money? And then when do they want their return on investment, whether it's a dividend or whether it's clear metrics on the social return on their investment. I think absolutely, because food hubs are so business-based, they really need to be analyzed and started up with a business plan.
Anybody else?
This is Jim, and this is just to add to what Kate said. I'm going to make a plug here actually for Leslie Schaller, who's actually on the webinar and is part of AceNet. And I like to classify them as a food hub incubator in some ways. They're a business incubation program based in Appalachia. And so the resources in thinking of a business model and getting a food enterprise up and started, they're just a wonderful resource. And then another plug to the Making Good Food Work Conference website, in which Leslie actually went in and put in a lot of information on things like business plans, feasibility studies, a lot of these things that any business should be employing, much like a food hub. So it's just a plug there.
I also think it's as we watch it from Detroit, one of the interesting things is at the market we have sort of the seasoned larger growers that have been coming to the market. You know, some of them 4 generations when the market opened in 1891. Then you have this. There is a fabulous trend going on with the first time in decades emerging new farmers and ranchers getting into agriculture, and there's a real learning curve going on here. You got a lot of these starter farmers beginning understanding their business plans, and now we're trying to aggregate. So it's something that has to happen, and it's kind of interesting just to watch the seasoned pros as well as the sort of less experienced people try to grapple with the same sorts of issues. It's just a fascinating time in the industry, I think.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so moving on. There's a question about, and we touched on this a bit in the presentation, what is the best legal structure, legal model for a food hub? And I think Jim's research had some information about that, and I know Kate had something to say too. So maybe Jim, tell us a little bit about what the research said and see if there was any, is there any rationale there?
Well, there's a majority of food hubs that are either nonprofit or a nonprofit is playing a role, and it might be more of a partnership model. It's a hard question to answer. There's a number of cooperative structures that seem to work quite well for food hubs, particularly when they're producer-based. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there's some really new innovative models that are occurring that are also kind of considered cooperatives, but they're considered multi-stakeholder cooperatives. And a very good example is Producer Buyers Co-op in Wisconsin right now that just started up last year, in which co-op members include producers, processors, distributors, and the buyers. So it's just a value chain all wrapped up in a very nice package. And so, that's another model that, we'll see, time will see how that works out. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's a lot of just for-profit LLCs, S-Corps, and C-Corps that work very well. And it's a lot about where the bottom line in many cases, where you consider your mission and your funding streams to be coming from. Clearly, as a nonprofit, there are advantages in terms of seeking grants and loans from the local, whether local, state, or federal. There's also some limitations in terms of the financing, whether you're doing factoring credit or something as a nonprofit. As an LLC, you might be in a much better position to get some of that financing and investors to get interested in you as opposed to a nonprofit. So there's going to be advantages, disadvantages. We actually hope to lay that out much more articulately than I just did in our resource guide that we hope to have out in September, looking at legal entities and advantages, disadvantages as a food hub.
Anybody else on that one?
I can just, I don't have much to add to what Jim put it. Jim put it very well. I don't think there's a definitive legal structure for a food hub. It really depends on what your goal is and who your investors are and what you need to start up. I can absolutely see one starting in any of those legal formats that that Jim stated.
Okay. I'm looking for a particular question here that had to do with technology and how. I mean, I think Dan, you referenced early on some of the Thomas Edison and Henry Ford models of technology and efficiency. You know, and today we've got the internet, we've got lots of electronic technology. Let's talk a little bit about how that may aid and abet what we're trying to do and reduce costs and increase connectivity. Any thoughts on that from any of you?
Well, I'll start since there's a bit of a pause, although I certainly want Kate and Dan's perspective on this. I think there is going to be a whirlwind of new technological advances that are going to be extremely helpful for food hubs moving forward. In fact, some of them are already in place. A lot of it has to do with streamlined, simplified distribution logistics software that already exists to a large measure within mainstream distribution, but is now being adapted and made more useful for smaller produce distributors. And I'm not just talking food hubs. I mean, there's a lot of mid-scale produce distributors that are still working off of phone calls and fact sheets. And we're quickly moving beyond that. And with some of the challenges or some of the complexities of working with an array of or diverse number of small producers, you need the technological piece. I mean, it will work for a while, but part of the scale and also to ensure the integrity of the system, we need to bring it online. And those tools are out there. Local Orbit is one. I'm going to just start throwing some plugs out there because they're also on the site in terms of virtual food hub models. Another, Sam Earl in Philadelphia, is building up a local food systems model that might be very useful for business platforms, online matchmaking, as well as distribution logistics. There's just a lot of stuff out there that could be useful, and I think we're going to see a lot of those products come online fairly soon.
I'd like to jump in on that one a little bit. You know, I think when we're talking about our farmers nationally, and also the trend is the same here locally, our farmers are 58.5 on average, and they barely have internet connections. So, and the same with our buyers, surprisingly. We don't have one buyer who places their order by email or anything like that. It's all about phone calls, and we really consider these personal connections an opportunity to get information from our farmers on the day-to-day activities that they have and their challenges, and also from our buyers to really an opportunity to upsell them on products that are coming in season and ways that other chefs or restaurateurs have been able to utilize that product. So we have a farmer group. If we look at our group, we have 50% that are under 40 and 50% that are over 40. Our biggest producers are over 40. And so kind of when you try and talk to them about technology, there's a disconnect immediately. So I think this is something that I'm glad it's in its working phases, and this is something that we probably should train our next generation farmers on. But I really think that there is a barrier really based on age and the fact that farmers are in the field. I mean, they barely have cell phones that connect when they're out in the field. And so it's an interesting thing to think about, is the human capital that you're dealing with.
Yeah, good range of answers there. Okay, so we're getting really low on time, and it's not fair to ask this next question, but I'm going to do it anyway, and let's try to keep it a really short answer because it's a really dense question. So the question's around why wouldn't corporate distributors like U.S. Food Service and Cisco ultimately try to capture this market and push the hubs out of business? So part of the solution, I think, lies in the question itself, and the second part that says, what is the unique point of, or differentiation of the food hubs and their role within the system? So who's got a short and to the point response? Maybe we get one from all of us, including maybe you, Marty, who's out there still, I know.
Nobody wants to jump in first.
Deep waters.
Go, Dan.
I think the point of differentiation.
Well, I was just going to say quickly, with our Cisco experience, that the interim food hubs ended up to be a value add to Cisco and made the difference between being able to work with the local growers, and that 20 growers could go to a food hub and provide enough volume for Dennis to work with. And he gave them the pricing that was acceptable and fair to them. And the food hub, you know, made the difference so that these folks could again, have locally sourced product that their customers were asking for. So that was our experience with the two different regions of that large buyer.
Yeah, and I think it's again a consumer-driven. The local food world is consumer-driven, and we have to expect that large providers are going to try to get into that world as consumers continue to demand it. So it gets back to the importance of the relationship building and the branding around the value of those relationships, I think.
And I think that food hubs provide a lot of services such as coordination and planning and aggregation that these big companies would just have to hire more staff to do. And our work with larger distributors, they really find value in, as Dan said, a clear branding and marketing strategy around the food, and also really dealing with the farmers on a day-to-day basis and kind of taking that work off of them so that they can offer a comprehensive line of local food without all the work involved in making it happen.
Jim, any deep thoughts?
It's been covered, and I think it's a great way to end.
And I guess my only, I'll play devil's advocate here a bit and say, you know, maybe it would be that we wouldn't need food hubs to do this if the existing infrastructure took this on and did it right? If it was actually embedded in our existing financial and economic system. And a lot of what we're doing is in response to the lack of the current system doing it. So maybe it wouldn't be all bad if you had some changes in the system in which existing distributors and such would be a bigger part of this. Just some food for thought. So with that, let me turn it back over to Jeff, who's going to close this here. I want to thank all the panelists for their great presentations and being really nimble on their feet with questions. And I want to thank everybody who asked questions. Like I said, we're going to do our best to get some written answers back to you. Check the website where this will be located, and Jeff will tell you more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to thank all our attendees who's spent the last hour and 45 minutes listening to us. Fascinating discussion. Thank you, Jim, Scott, John, Kate, and Dan, and Marty. Really very interesting and very valuable. So this webinar is being recorded and it's archived. It will be archived on our site along with more than 24 other webinars we've done in the past. Feel free to point others who you think would like to have heard this panel to this page. Absolutely information packed. You may want to review this webinar yourself and take some professional development time and dig through our archives as well. On ngfn.org/food hubs, there's a link to particular webinars that may be interesting to this crowd that have to do with food hubs, but feel free to dig through. I know you've all been sitting in the same place for a long time now, so I do want to be brief. I want to tell you that our NGFN webinars are every third Thursday of the month, generally at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Sign-up links are at ngfn.org/webinars. Our next webinar, June 16, we dig into retail with a focus on serving underserved communities. We're excited to have Fair Food Philly's Executive Director Ann Carlin present her work on determining the best place to replicate her highly successful small market in the Philly terminal market. And we'll have a second contrasting story on a larger scale. So don't miss that upcoming webinar, ngfn.org/webinars to sign up. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and on our website, ngfn.org. I encourage you to add your name, interests, your bio, and other information to our growing database of people, organizations, and funders. There's also a link to that on ngfn.org/foodhubs. This is I especially invite the consultants out there who'd like to work with or food hubs, food hubs. It's a great way to get your name out there. Don't forget ngfn.org/foodhubs. Also, if you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. There's a link on the ngfn.org homepage, and there's also an option on the survey that will come up just when this webinar ends. Thank you very much for your time today, and this concludes the webinar. Please fill out the survey. Take care.